The big story of the day, and it was a surprising move at the end of last week. Apple announced that it's decided to turn off the advanced data protection feature in the UK. Now, this decision comes after pressure from the UK government, which ordered Apple to build a global backdoor into its iCloud encryption system. Now, we did talk about this story a couple of weeks ago. However, rather than comply, Apple chose to disable the feature entirely for UK users. But as you can imagine, and of course this becomes politicized very quickly, there's a lot of confusion about what this actually means. So I decided today to break it down. Okay, so the first thing to be aware of is Apple is not removing end-to-end encryption altogether. What they're actually disabling is a feature called Advanced Data Protection. Now, this was a feature introduced back in December 2022 as an optional setting that allowed people to expand the number of iCloud data categories protected by end-to-end encryption. So what's actually affected? Well, here are some of those categories that will no longer be end-to-end encrypted in the UK. They include iCloud Backup, iCloud Drive, Photos, Notes, Reminders, Safari bookmarks, Siri shortcuts, voice memos, wallet passes, and Freeform. Now, instead of end-to-end encryption, these categories will now be covered by standard data protection, which basically means your data is still encrypted when it's being sent over the internet and while it's stored on Apple's servers. But here's the catch. Apple holds the encryption keys, so they can access your data if needed, like when you sign in on a new device or recover a forgotten password. So you might be wondering, well, what's still safe? Well, here's the good news. These categories are still end-to-end encrypted by default, even in the UK. Passwords and keychain, health data, journal data, home data, that's anything relating to your smart devices in your home, messages in iCloud, payment information and Apple Card transactions, maps, QuickType keyboard learned vocabulary, Safari, screen time, Siri information, Wi-Fi passwords, W1 and H1 Bluetooth keys for connecting to your devices at home, memojis as well. Now, this means that some of your most sensitive data, like passwords, health information, and messages, remain fully protected. Also, Apple's communication platforms like iMessage and FaceTime continue to be fully end-to-end encrypted. One more thing to keep in mind, though, most users in the UK never actually opted in to advanced data protection in the first place, and I'm sure that's the case around the world as well. It was always an optional feature for those looking for extra security. Now, if you did enable advanced data protection, Apple says if you're in the UK, you'll have to disable it to keep accessing your iCloud accounts. You're not safe by turning it on beforehand. You haven't got away with anything. Now, look, more details on all of that and how that will work will come soon from Apple themselves. So here's the question. Why is Apple doing this? Well, it all comes down to government pressure. The UK asked for a backdoor into iCloud encryption, but Apple said no, sticking to its long-standing policy against weakening its security systems. Disabling advanced data protection in the UK was a compromise to avoid building a backdoor that could potentially be exploited globally. In the end, it is a delicate balancing act between user privacy and legal demands, but rest assured, end-to-end encryption is not completely gone in the UK, it's just a little bit more limited than it was before.
Wow. I've got to say, Stephen, that should be put out everywhere. That covered so many questions. And the main one being, so my messages are still end-to-end encrypted with advanced protection.
And that's the thing we've got to get across, right? Because there's a lot of misinformation flying around about this. And you have to really be careful about who you're listening to and what political viewpoint they're coming from. Because everything's politicized now. Every single thing. So this has become, a free speech war. It's become a war on data. It's some of that and it's none of that. And that's the thing. We've got to be careful about what is available. The other thing to be aware of here is that the government do have still to go to court to get information retrieved from your device. You can't.
Yeah, they need a warrant.
There's no way they can just find out what Shaun and I are messaging each other about, right?
Yes. That's true.
The other thing to consider here as well is if you're using other services, and of course there's a bigger question mark here around what will happen in the future with other services, because Apple were not, and although there's absolutely no confirmation of this, because this is a very strange situation, right? The UK government hasn't confirmed that they've ever spoken to Apple about this. Apple have never confirmed that the government have ever reached out to them about this. Yet we're in this situation because of some weird law thing. I don't get it, but for some reason, no one can admit to any of this. I don't know why, but that seems to be where we're at.
It's a legal thing. They're not allowed. And any requests that any government makes to any tech company for backdoor access to encrypted data or unencrypted data also cannot be publicized. It needs to be. They can't talk about it. The company can't talk about it.
That's right. So they can't even tell you. So Apple couldn't tell you that the government have requested information on you either.
No, that's
It's all very weird. It's all very weird. But essentially, a lot of the stuff that we use every day is still encrypted. iCloud Drive, I think, and Photos, perhaps, those are the ones that people are a little bit more concerned about. But I go back to this point. A lot of us did not even switch this feature on, me included.
Yeah, me too. And, I spoke to a few people since the story had broken, and they were outraged. This is terrible, this is terrible. And I just made the point of, have you even turned it on?
Yeah.
Well, no, it's on by default. No, it's not. You need to go to, settings, go to iCloud, go to the bottom, and you'll see ADP, Advanced Data Protection, and you need to turn that on. In order to turn it on, you need two-factor verification on your Apple ID. You need a secondary recovery email or a recovery key set up. It's not something you just switch on and not know about it. So a lot of people don't even have this turned on. I will say, though, I'm quite surprised that Messages is not sort of opened up under this, because I thought that would be the thing that the government would be interested in.
Absolutely,
to
right.
see the communications between certain individuals.
Yeah.
But apparently not. I'm really shocked by that.
I mean, okay, I don't know what they gain necessarily, but I suppose I'm glad that Messages are encrypted still. Also, it's important to say that services out with the core Apple services on your Apple phone will still remain encrypted. Like, for example, WhatsApp messages. Now, again, down the line, who knows what's going to happen here, right? That's the big question.
And do we know they haven't got a backdoor already? We don't know. All these big, as we mentioned, they have a gag order. They can't say if they do or not.
So it's funny, right? Because I was watching Zero Day at 3 o'clock in the morning, and one of the things that was brought up was, we've managed to retrieve information from WhatsApp messages. And I thought, that's interesting. Is that possible? I know this is a drama and it's fiction and all that, but I just wondered if any of that was potentially true. Could they do that? And I don't know if they can, but I suppose if the company holds the encryption keys, it depends on who holds the encryption key, right? That's the big question. And of course, in Apple's case, at the moment, you have, as I say, this standard data protection capability, which means that you are protected to some degree, but it's Apple that holds the keys. So if the government come calling, and maybe that's the answer to the iMessage thing, right? Okay, so there's encryption there, but the government could say to Apple, we want access to this, and they could potentially offer it, and that's how you get round it. Maybe that's the win for them.
But that's the same as standard protection anyway, which is what we in the UK get. I mean, so end-to-end encryption, for people that don't know, means that there's almost like I've got a key on my iPhone, and Stephen's got a key on his iPhone, and I send him a message, and I wrap it up in a padlock, and I send it to him. Anyone who managed to steal that package or message, in the middle of it getting to Stephen, can open it. It's end-to-end encrypted. It's only when it gets to Stephen's iPhone that he has the key to read that message or open the package, to push that analogy.
Yeah.
So that's end-to-end encryption. Standard encryption means that, the postman has the key just in case, which is, in this case, is Apple. So, I don't know. It depends, I suppose. I've seen so many different opinions on this, and I think you mentioned about being politicized. I think you're absolutely right. It depends on your view on government overreach, security, digital freedoms. It touches on so many different aspects of society, really. In my case, as I said, didn't have it on in the first place. Honestly, couldn't care less.
Yeah.
But is it a slippery slope? Is it, here in the UK, we have some draconian laws when it comes to digital information. Hate speech on posting social media, we can be arrested and imprisoned for that here in the UK. Is this an attack on democracy? We've got all these arguments going on in this current climate. Yeah, it's interesting to say the least.
And it's way more nuanced than some would like to tell you. I mean, especially when it comes to free speech. I mean, look, if, for example, in the UK, and I don't know if this is the case around the world, but you can't shout fire in a theatre. or in a cinema. You couldn't shout that word because you would be inciting essentially almost a riot or chaos. So there are legal frameworks that have been in place for many years, and a lot of, let's just say it, right-wingers love to jump up and down on this stuff and say it's against freedom of speech. There are some on the far left who say the same.
I don't even think it's right or left anymore. You can't say that, isn't it?
We live in the extremities now. That's the problem. We live inside the extremities. We don't live on the centre ground anymore. So it's very hard for the centrists to have a say on anything. Goodness, let's not talk politics because, that would the show ruined for the day and my mood. Okay, I want to bring in Will Guy, though, because he spoke to us on Double Tap back on the 10th of February, and he said at the time that he thought this might end up being the UK essentially buying a very large sledgehammer to crack a very small nut. Let's hear what he had to say.
I am of the view that more needs to be done to protect young people, particularly online. Yeah. But I am not of the view that encryption automatically equals harbour for paedophiles and child sexual abuse material, which is what one leading UK children's charity is doing. And it infuriates me every time I see it, because the argument simply is not as simple as that. There's more nuance to the argument, because encryption can be and is used legally and properly by millions and millions of people. And the conversation here is about whether you let the 99.999% of the population who are going to use it legitimately and to keep their information safe online, or whether you roll back that privilege of encryption for everybody on the basis that there are, and I'm not saying there aren't, there are some bad apples using this kind of encryption to share illegal content or hide away from law enforcement. The big fear is what comes from this as a massive overreach. If they've asked Apple, who else have they asked? Yeah. Is the question many people in my profession are asking. Have Meta been approached? Whoever else with encryption services have they been approached too? And the answer is probably yes, they probably have, because Apple wouldn't be the sole, definitely aren't the sole user of encryption. WhatsApp is far bigger in terms of UK usership and audience for encrypted services.
So it's not like there's a safe place to go to at the moment, is there? That's the thing, because look, we don't know, down the line Meta may be forced to do this as well. This could have significant impact on not so much the encryption, that's one thing, but actually the service itself. I mean, Apple could threaten to pull out entirely of the UK. I don't think they would do that. I'm not sure that other companies would go ahead and do that, but you just don't know. Any thoughts, Shaun?
Oh, I'm sorry. I muted myself. Hello. Yes.
I thought you'd gone quiet. I thought you were musing there.
I was for a second. Well, it's interesting. You say pull out of the UK. If they did it in the UK, then other countries follow suit, because I don't think the UK is going to be the only country asking for these backdoors. And indeed, I don't think they are as of yet. I'm sure this has happened many, many times before. So it's this new ground, really. Encryption, the level of encryption. We can assume that encryption was always breakable before, and governments really didn't care about it. But with the power on our devices in our pocket now, I think that encryption is far better, and I think governments are being frustrated across the line. But it is difficult because, again, as Guy brought up there, when you bring up things about, children's safety or terrorism, things like that, of course you want to say, okay, that's above everything else. I don't care about my privacy. But that can be abused as well. So it's very difficult.
And that's the question. What happens next? What other countries are looking at this right now? I mean, bear in mind that the UK is being led by a Labour government. So it's a left-leaning government. This is not a right-wing, far-right approach to, getting into our data. That's not what's going on here. This, if you want to politicize it, this is coming from the left. So, we wonder what this means for other liberal democracies around the world. Are they looking to do this as well to avoid and obviously deal with the issues of terrorism, deal with the challenges of online hate and online paedophilia and all the stuff that's going on, the horrors of the world? How do you deal with this? It does feel a little bit excessive to some degree when...
Oh, I totally agree.
As we're, essentially saying 99.9% of people out there are using everything well, and the 0.1% are the ones that we're trying to get to. But if the way we're getting to them isn't working, then perhaps we do need to give up a little bit more privacy.
I would argue, as I've always argued, that the tech companies can do so much more when it comes to detecting when something, let's just say, inappropriate or illegal is going on. We have these amazing, let's focus on social media. We have these amazing algorithms that seem like magic, that they must be listening to us because they've showed me this advert of something we were just talking about the other day. Yet they can't tell when inappropriate conversation is going on between an adult and a child. Absolute nonsense.
But that's the problem. They're not doing it. That's the problem. They're not doing it.
No.
There's still
Why?
hateful content existing online, and these companies are not taking responsibility for it. And every one of them is guilty of this. Every single one. No one has taken any responsibility. They just see themselves as, well, we're not publishers. And they are. That's the way I would look at this. They are publishers in the same way that a newspaper or any online publication would have to defend itself against what it writes and what it puts online. To me, it's the same approach, but they'd say, well, it's not our content. We're not doing it that way. This is people putting their stuff up there. What they do is what they do. They're not taking responsibility. And look, we know over at X, that's pretty much not happening. We know that over at Meta, things are changing.
They are all the same when it comes to
Let's be honest about it. The US government,
responsibility.
the change in government in the US has opened the floodgates for these companies to basically take their hands off the wheel entirely. So there's no way around this other than governments outside of the US at the moment thinking, okay, how can we protect our citizens? How can we protect children? How can we protect people online? Because we always go to, the extremities. And of course, paedophilia is a very real problem and it must be tackled. But a lot of this is scams as well. It's other things as well, which happen to people every single day. How many times a day do you get a phone call or a text message? Hi, Dad, I've lost my phone. This is my new number. My dad got, that message just the other week. He called me, thank goodness, to say, I've had this weird text from you.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, that's not from me.
You have a parcel, please, Yeah, all those. Of course, billions and billions of pounds, the UK stats, billions and billions of pounds are lost each year to phone scams. That could easily be quashed.
Yeah.
Through the phone companies, not allowing spoofed phone numbers through. They can detect that, yet they're not done. Why? I have no idea. But it seems like we've got to go the other way around and try and mop up afterwards.
Yeah.
Never mind let's stop it at source. Let's stop it as there's people trying to make contact, as the contact is going on, not afterwards. I don't know. Well, it's very tricky.
Look, Apple and Google both bring in and have brought in robust encryption protocols into their smartphones, which is great, but their approaches differ in some areas. So we thought we'd dig a little bit into this and find out which, if either, is the safer and more secure choice. Here's Mark Aflalo with the story.
Both iOS and Android devices come with encryption enabled by default. On iPhones, all data is encrypted as soon as a passcode is set. That ensures that only the user can decrypt that information. Similarly, modern Android devices also encrypt users' data by default, though the effectiveness can vary based on the device manufacturers and the models. When it comes to backing up to the cloud, Apple offers end-to-end encryption for iCloud backups through its advanced data protection feature, meaning only the user holds the decryption keys. However, as has been reported, Apple has ceased offering ADP to new users in the UK and will require existing users to disable it following government demands for backdoor access. Google does provide encrypted backups for Android devices, but the specifics can vary, and users are encouraged to review their settings to ensure optimal security. What about messaging? Well, Apple's iMessage service employs end-to-end encryption for messages between Apple devices, ensuring that only the sender and the recipient can read the content. For cross-platform messaging, Apple has introduced support for the Rich Communication Services, otherwise known as RCS protocol, in iOS 18. That enhances features, but notably without end-to-end encryption. Google's Messages app supports RCS with end-to-end encryption for one-on-one chats between Android devices, but RCS messages between Android and iPhone users lack this level of encryption. As for on-device AI processing, Apple has made a pretty big deal of the fact that they use on-device processing for AI-related tasks. That enhances user privacy by minimizing how much data is actually sent to external servers, although they do use ChatGPT as an option, which does require a connection to the cloud. Google, conversely, employs a hybrid approach, processing some AI tasks on-device and others in the cloud, which can expose that data to additional risks. Unlike Android, Apple maintains strict control over its hardware and software ecosystem, allowing for timely security updates across all supported devices. This uniformity ensures consistent security standards. In contrast, the Android ecosystem's diversity means that security updates can be delayed or even inconsistent across different devices and manufacturers, which potentially leaves some devices more vulnerable than others. So what have we learned? Well, while both Apple and Google prioritize user security, Apple's integrated ecosystem and emphasis on on-device processing offers a more controlled and, in some aspects, a more secure environment. However, recent developments such as Apple's compliance with UK government demands highlight that security measures can vary based on the regional regulations and policies.
Thank you to Mark Aflalo there for breaking that down for us, because, look, I think there's often concern about what is happening with Apple, and we're hearing a lot about that, but what else is going on out there? What is available? The challenge for Google, to me, is always the same, which is that you have such a fractured ecosystem out there. Well, maybe not so much ecosystem. Upgrade ecosystem, perhaps, is maybe a better way to look at it. You know, you have various devices that are not able to run the latest operating systems. Sometimes it takes longer to get an operating system onto a device. It's more fractured in its delivery of Android. That's perhaps one of its biggest downsides.
But they have addressed that with the system, core updates, where if there's a bug at system level, at core kernel level, then, Google can push out updates to that no matter what the operating system, to a certain degree, depending if it's not a really old Android.
Yeah.
Could they push the security as a core element, and then that could be updated? Encryption would be the same across devices. It is very, take Android out of it, the whole encryption ecosystem is fractured. You mentioned RCS there. RCS has the ability to do end-to-end encryption, but some implement it, Apple don't, and it's just, you have no idea. Basically, just don't do anything wrong or illegal, and you'll be fine.
That's the bottom line. There you go. Just be good people, and everything will be fine.